Hello and welcome to English 2. I'm your online teacher, Miss Bear. We are working on a Common Lit unit, expository writing, about the fashion industry from past to present. You can see that it is part of the Common Lit 360 curriculum. You can see that on the board behind you or in front of you. And then our research question is, Francis Cabot Lowell had a utopian vision for a factory that would make profits for the owners while also improving the lives of the workers. What was his vision? And then to what extent has his vision been realized since its inception? All of the text that we read, you will be gaining evidence that you can use to answer those questions for your research. And you might want to do some research on your own as well. And so we will dig into how to make sure that those sources are reliable and that they are valid. And so we're going to process through those as we work through this unit. For our agenda today, you will see that we will work on activity 2 from our vocabulary activity set 1. So make sure you have that out on your desk. We will also be reading an article together on the mills in Massachusetts, A Changing America. And this text provides you with a historical background that will enable you to engage thoughtfully with the primary sources in this unit. As you read, just like you did the last time, you're going to be tracing how that central idea is developed throughout that text. So at this time, I need you to make sure that you get out your vocabulary activity set 1, and I want you to flip to page 4 for activity 2. And this is the fill in the blank sentences. So have your pencil and your paper, and I would like for you to go ahead and complete that activity 2. It shouldn't take you more than about 5 or 6 minutes. And then once you're done, I want you to start previewing that mills in Massachusetts. And when everyone in your class is done, we will come back together and look at a PowerPoint before we start reading, but I do want you to preview that reading when you finish. So I'm going to pause for a second so you can finish your activity and then look over your text. Good job on that vocabulary. I had a great question during that time. Miss Bear, why didn't you go over the questions in the text that we went over the last time? And why aren't you going to go over the answers to this vocabulary? Those are great questions. And the real answer is that I'm not allowed. And that's okay. The teacher in your classroom has those resources, and the teacher in your classroom, I am hoping, I've got my fingers crossed, that they are going to go over some of these answers with you. But they will also, some of your teachers may use these questions as an evaluation method to actually give you grades in your classroom. But why am I not allowed to go over those answers? Well, the truth of that is this is part of a Common Lit unit, and Common Lit kind of holds teachers to maintain the integrity of their units and their curriculum. They don't want teachers to share these answers in any public way. Now, in a classroom, it's still public, but it's still very private, right? It's not being broadcast to lots of different people, and the answers aren't being published online. The Common Lit 360 curriculum is used all over the United States. It's even used in some countries abroad for Americans, and I don't know if they're developing any curriculum for in other languages, but there are American schools abroad that also use the 360 curriculum from Common Lit. And so I don't want to violate any of their policies, and so that's why I don't go over these answers with you. And that's okay though. The teacher that's in your classroom should be doing that. All right, we got that elephant out of the room. Let's move into the mills in Massachusetts. And before we get directly to our text that you have hopefully had a chance to preview, let's kind of dig into what this text is going to be about. So you remember the graphic that we looked at the beginning that is the real cost of cheap fashion? We talked about where your clothes are made. We also had a picture of a little boy who was working in a factory. And also on the screen in front of you, there is a photograph, and it looks like a building has collapsed. And you're going to learn a little bit about that as well, about fires that have happened in the past and different things that have happened. So, a question for you to turn and talk with a neighbor and then share out. What are some of the real costs or negative effects of cheap fashion just with what you know so far? Great job. Those were some great ideas that you shared with each other. Now I want you to answer the question and share again. Do you think these problems with cheap fashion have always existed? Raise your hand to share those answers. Those were also some really good ideas. And some of you said, why am I going to answer this? I know I'm going to learn this throughout this unit. And you're right. You're going to learn whether or not these same problems existed beforehand since the Industrial Revolution. So, again, during this unit, you're going to find out whether these problems existed during an earlier era of textile manufacturing. So let's look at some historical context. Okay, so you will see in 1769, factories were invented in England. And then 1775 to 1783, we had the American Revolutionary War. And you see all those different events. And you see in brackets, we're going to be focusing on the era of 1840 to about 1814 to about 1850, right before the American Civil War. And some of the different ideas that you see on your screen, that Francis Cabot Lowell developing that Lowell system, 32 mills producing cotton textiles in Lowell, Massachusetts. Oh, I wonder if his family were the founders of that town in Massachusetts, since their name is the name of the town. It's interesting, right? And then we're going to talk about the Irish immigration to America and how that kind of changed some of the ideas in the textile industry. Today, though, we're going to read about the Lowell system and its influence on American manufacturing. And you see in front of you kind of some of these factories from, or this idea that Lowell had, this utopia. The utopia is what you see on your screen. As we read today, again, I want you to trace how that central idea is developed by drawing connections between people and events. So right now, make sure that you have your copy out, and you notice that we are going to start with a whole class reading. Now, just because we're doing a whole class reading does not mean that I'm going to be able to answer those questions in the margins with you. You are going to be answering those questions either with a partner or by yourself, but I will not be going over those questions. So let's dig right in, and I'm going to start reading. So make sure you've got your pencil in hand, and I will pause after paragraph 2 so that you can complete the first during reading question. Have you ever wondered where the clothes you wear come from? If you lived in colonial or Revolutionary era America, the answer would be obvious, because your clothing would have been made by you or someone you know. Most clothes were cut and sewn at home by women. Even cloth was usually made at home, a process which could include raising sheep, shearing the sheep for wool, spinning the wool into thread on a spinning wheel, and weaving that thread into cloth on a hand-powered loom. Cotton fabrics also existed, but were even more labor-intensive to produce. The work of planting and raising cotton, picking the cotton balls, and separating the lint from the seed was mostly done by enslaved African Americans on cotton plantations in the South. Then the cotton lint would be spun into thread and woven into cloth either by enslaved workers or by free white women in their homes throughout the country. Making cloth this way was a time-consuming, laborious process, which meant that most people had only a few items of clothing. Ready-made clothes like you might buy at the mall today were almost non-existent. So I'm going to pause and let you answer the during reading questions, the think and share. How has modern manufacturing changed people's relationship with clothing? All right, let's continue reading in paragraph 3. What ready-made goods were available were produced by hand in putting out system? Under this system, an employer would send materials out to individual workers who would spin, weave, cut, or sew at home, and then send the goods back to the employer so they could be put out to the next person in the process. Workers would be paid per piece produced. Now I want to pause and I want you to turn and talk with a neighbor after paragraph 3. Was putting out an efficient production system? Why or why not? All right, let's continue reading in paragraph 4. In the 18th century, there came a huge change in the way goods are produced. During what historians call the market revolution, several factories came together to change the way Americans and workers all over the world produced goods. The intersection of many factories, new technologies, new systems of production, limited opportunities for free women, cheap raw goods produced by slave labor, and the unique ideas of one visionary named Francis Cabot Lowell led to an innovation in American textile manufacturing known as the Lowell system. All right, now it is time for you to read the next section independently. So you are going to read paragraphs 5 through 10 independently, and then once you finish reading independently, continue previewing, make sure you're answering the during reading questions, and then we'll come back together and I will put you with some partner reading. You guys did a great job reading that independently. Now it is time to read with a partner. So you're going to read paragraphs 11 through 18 with your partner. All right, this last section, before I go here, we're going to read a little bit more together. So let's look at paragraph 19, and I think we're going to read through the end of this together. We are, and then you're going to, I'm not going to pause after paragraph 21. I'm going to let you do those questions when I finish. All right, so let's read together. While Lowell's hope was to create a positive, empowering experience for the young white women he employed, the reality was that his mills could not have existed without the cruel exploitation of enslaved black people. When free people labored on a farm, the owner would give them room and board as well as a cash wage. Therefore, cotton plantation owners saved immense amounts of money by keeping their workers enslaved. Their only labor cost were room and board. However, the food which the enslaved workers ate was also grown and harvested on the plantation, and the enslaved people built their own housing. This enabled plantation owners to maintain the large workforce necessary for the labor-intensive cultivation of cotton. The owners had little overhead, so they were able to make large profits while keeping the cost of raw cotton low. This benefited the northern factory owners who turned cheap raw cotton into much more expensive cloth. As the mills expanded, the North's growing appetite for raw cotton pushed plantation owners to increase production. This meant the plantation owners needed more slaves. Although Congress had passed an act in 1807 that made it illegal to capture Africans and sell them into slavery in the United States, those Americans who were already enslaved remained so. The need for more cotton led to the expansion of slavery into new areas in the West and the sale of many enslaved African Americans from northern areas down the river to cotton plantations in the deep South. Lowell mills not only brought Southern cotton, they also made Negro cloth, a coarse, durable weave that they sold to plantations to make clothing for enslaved people. Senator Charles Sumner called it an unholy union between cotton planters and the fleshmongers of Louisiana and Mississippi and the cotton spinners and traffickers of New England, between the lords of the lash and the lords of the loom. When an anti-slavery speaker came to Lowell in 1834, he drew an angry, stone-throwing mob. Mill owners and workers depended on Southern cotton. Anyone who threatened the system was unwelcome. At the same time, many Lowell residents were uncomfortable enough about slavery that they opposed its extension into Western territories. Moral discomfort over slavery coexisted uneasily in Lowell with the desire for profits, and the profits were enormous. The Lowell system made it possible to transform raw cotton into cloth under one roof, minimizing overhead and maximizing profits for the Boston Associates. This tight-knit group of families, the Appletons, Cabots, Lowells, Lawrences, and Jacksons, built an economic, social, and political empire. They helped develop railroad lines in New England. They owned controlling stock in many Boston banks and insurance companies. As their fortunes grew, the Boston Associates played a prominent role in Massachusetts politics. Until the Civil War, the Boston Associates were New England's dominant families. All right, I hope that you guys enjoyed reading this together, and I hope that you learned a lot about the Lowell system and kind of why this system even came into existence. So now I want you to take a minute, and I want you to notice the next page in your text shows a research note-taking graphic organizer. And on here you will see it's not part of today's packet of materials, or it is part, but it will not actually begin working on it until tomorrow. But I want you to notice this symbol, and you may have seen it throughout our unit as we have been going through these texts. This one says independent work. When you see that symbol, you know it is time to work by yourself. You'll also notice that there's another symbol for partner work. So I want you to kind of pay attention to those as we read through these texts, because you will notice them in lots of places throughout our packets of material that we're getting together. So just notice that. We're going to work on the research note-taking next time. But for right now, I want you to work independently and complete the text-dependent questions from Mills in Massachusetts, A Changing America. All right, the last thing that we're going to do is a partner activity where you're going to discuss what you learned. So those questions are the very back of your packet. So if you will take a minute with your partner and answer the questions there. Fantastic job. Now, some of you are getting a little antsy, and maybe you're anticipating and you really want to start digging into that research graphic organizer. Please don't do that yet. We are going to do that tomorrow as a class. You will probably have some time to talk about it with a partner, but that's really something that you're going to be doing independently to kind of start gathering that research that you're going to need to answer our research question for our end of the unit task. So that's all that I have for you today. Until next time, happy learning.